With attention turned to a diplomatic rift between Saudi Arabia and Iran, meanwhile, Saudi has ended a ceasefire agreement in Yemen. Just today, UN officials confirmed that Saudi-led coalition bombing hit a rehabilitation center for the blind in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a. To discuss the latest in Saudi, as well as the implications for the region, earlier I spoke with two guests, James Jatras, Deputy Director of the American Institute in Ukraine, and Adam Whitcomb, Policy Analyst at the Institute for Gulf Affairs.
So the SCC courts were formed in 2008, and they were formed to combat or fight the counterterrorism attacks that were happening within Saudi Arabia. However, as the years have passed, they have turned to try cases of political dissidents. Really, in the case of Nimr al-Nimr, in 2012 he was shot when he was arrested, and he's been in jail ever since. And these courts have tried numerous others, including those who have been executed this past Saturday, including Nimr al-Nimr's nephew, Ali al-Nimr, who was arrested when he was only 17 years old, a child. So these courts rely on judiciary discretion and not upon Sharia law. And so this allows them the flexibility to try whomever they would like under the guise of counterterrorism.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad you brought up the case of Ali al-Nimr. We'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. But James, I want to talk to you about the region now and what may have motivated Saudi here, because executing al-Nimr was definitely provocative. But what message is this U.S. ally sending to the region, especially at a time when it seems as though the U.S. has accepted it needs to cooperate with Iran, particularly in Syria and Iraq?
Well, I think that's exactly the point, the notion that Western powers would be moving toward cooperation with Iran. If you look, for example, at the fall of Ramadi to Baghdad's forces in Iraq, the increasing pressure that Daesh and the other jihadist groups are being placed in Syria by the Russian Air Force and the Syrian army, I think this is something that was very disturbing to Riyadh, which has lavished a lot of resources in supporting these terrorist groups. Aside from whatever their domestic motivations may have been, I think this in some ways was very similar to Erdogan shooting down that Russian Sukhoi several weeks ago to try to bust up an increasing consensus between Iran and the Western powers, and to force, at least they hope, that Washington and Saudi Arabia's Western partners would be dragged in on our side against the Iranians and get rid of this trend, which they found very disturbing.
Well, Syria and Iraq are getting a lot of attention because those are two countries where the U.S. is directly involved. But a country that has been totally ignored by the media, as I mentioned, is Yemen. And that's a country that Saudi Arabia has been bombing since last April. So we just see the most recent counts. 28,000 civilians have been killed as a result of Saudi bombing. And last month, Human Rights Watch even released a report saying Saudi Arabia has indiscriminately targeted schools, hospitals, markets, and residential homes in Yemen. HRW claims Saudi is getting special treatment from the West here and the international community, and essentially a free pass to continue with this war. Why do you think so?
Frankly, I think it's worse than a free pass. I think it's direct U.S. complicity in a horrible, inhumane campaign the Saudis are conducting here. Frankly, if Saudi Arabia were one of our adversary countries rather than an ally, we'd probably be calling for them to be bombed for their actions in Yemen. Instead, we're supporting them with refueling, with intelligence, with supplying military equipment. We are directly, yes, exactly. We are directly complicit with what the outrages the Saudis are committing in Yemen. Why are we doing it? Why do we have this very close relationship with the House of Saud, which also, let's add, is one of the biggest supporters of international terrorism, maybe the biggest in the globe? I think a lot of it has to do with arms deals, with the kind of sales we make to the Saudis, but also let's not ignore the fact they spend several $billion a year peddling influence in this town. They were one of the biggest purveyors of lobbying services here, and it counts. They basically own this town.
Adam, I wonder what you make of something Simone really highlighted in her report, which is the U.S.'s ambivalence to openly criticize Saudi Arabia for, as James says, something that if it were an adversarial country, the U.S. would be criticizing or perhaps denouncing the fact that they are set to chair the UN Council on Human Rights.
Well, it's almost exactly as James said. It's really the rapport that we've established with them over the past 70 years, ever since 1945, the deal with Roosevelt, or oil for protection, essentially. And now, since Saudi Arabia doesn't need protection, because we provide them with billions of dollars of deals, then that makes us complicit, as he said, in all of these crimes that they're partaking in Yemen, in addition to funding Syrian rebels as well. So really, we've already invested ourselves in this conflict, the United States, and it's hard for us to criticize a regime that is doing these things when we're the actual people backing them to do this.
And since I mentioned earlier, we have about a minute left, but you brought up the case of Ali al-Nimr, and it's a pretty striking case. You said he was arrested when he was 17. He's now 21. What does his uncle's execution mean for his future?
His uncle executions really means that there is no promise that the United States government can make, that the House of Saud can make, that would guarantee his life. Right now, his life only stands with two men, King Salman and his son Mohammed bin Salman, who is the defense minister currently, the youngest one in the entire world, actually. And just because Saudi Arabia cannot stand any opposing narrative within their country, they execute these 47 people, including the Shia cleric. And if something else provokes them to do this, there's nothing that can stop them internationally or domestically.
Well, the United States and counterparts in the UK and across the West have said that they'll continue to express concern with the scheduled or the execution of this 21-year-old man. But we've seen how good those expressed concerns do. I think Saudi demonstrated how much they listened to those this weekend. James Jatras, Deputy Director of the American Institute for Ukraine, and Adam Whitcomb, Policy Analyst for the Institute of Gulf Affairs. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.